Thank you for joining me for this talk, and thank you for Closer for inviting me. In the talk today, I'll be giving a brief overview of the Born in Bradford cohort and the geographical linked data that we have available and how it's produced. And then I'll finish by giving a few research examples of how we've used it in our green space research and explain how you can access the data in Born in Bradford. So the Born in Bradford cohort is set in the city of Bradford in West Yorkshire. It's the 7th largest city in the UK and is one with a rich history as a centre of textile manufacturing. And like many industrial cities, workers and immigrants flocked to Bradford, and a lot of these came from the South Asia area, particularly Pakistan, making Bradford a diverse and multicultural city with almost a quarter of its population of South Asian background. Bradford is also a deprived city, ranking 13th most deprived local authority in England, with almost a third of its neighbourhoods falling within the 10% most deprived in England. And about 60% of babies who are born into the city are born into the 20% poorest of England and Wales. On this slide, what it's showing is that the city also has high levels of ill health, with the fingertips here showing just a snapshot of indicators such as obesity, breastfeeding initiation, and infant mortality being worse than the English average. And it's data like this and the high levels of child mortality and child morbidity that led researchers here to take a closer look. And this is what put the impetus to setting up the Born in Bradford cohort. So the BIB cohort was set up not only to describe the health and ill health of the children, but had aims of actively improving the health and well-being of its children through the development of interventions and by strengthening research capacity in order to really make that link between research and practice. BIB is a birth cohort, so recruitment to BIB occurred at the Bradford Royal Infirmary Maternity Unit, where almost all women in Bradford book and give birth. All women who are applying to give birth at BRI were considered eligible for recruitment to BIB, and the only exclusion criteria were if the women planned to move away after the birth. In Bradford, all women are offered a oral glucose tolerance test at 26 to 28 weeks gestation, and about 80% of women take up this offer. It was during these visits between 2007 and 2011 that we recruited women to BIB. And of the women who attended the oral glucose tolerance test, over 80% took up the invitation to participate in Born in Bradford, and they then completed a baseline questionnaire, which gathered data on demographic information, socioeconomic, and lifestyle behaviors, as well as providing biological samples. In total, we recruited 12,453 mothers, with a resulting 13,858 children. As you can see from here, mothers consented to data linkage, so routinely collected data such as details of their delivery, radiology, GP records, prescriptions, hospital admissions, and health visiting information were collected. We've also worked with our local education services to link education data from the National Pupil Database for our BIB children, and NHS tracing allows us to update our addresses on a regular basis, and this allows us to track the movements of our cohort, but also makes things like sending birthday cards to our participants easier. And it also provides the type of data that we need to create environmental maps to assess, for example, the distance of a participant's home to their nearest green space or their exposure to air pollutants. As mentioned previously, Bradford is a diverse city with almost a quarter of its population of South Asian origin, about 90% of whom are from Pakistan. And with the relatively young age of the Pakistani origin population and their higher fertility rates compared to the white British population, approximately half of the babies that were born into the city at the time of recruitment had parents of Pakistani origin, and this is reflected in the cohort ethnic breakdown seen here. So the BIB cohort is really largely bi-ethnic, and it provides us with a unique opportunity to examine the role of ethnicity in our research studies. So if we move on to our geographical linked data. So in BIB, we have mapped the urban environment using GIS, a system to capture, manage, and present geographic data, allowing researchers to more easily visualize, analyze, and understand the patterns and relationships. The figure on the right here shows a simplified graphic of how a place or an area is a snapshot in time composed of these multiple data layers of information, where each layer contains just one type of information, for example, noise or temperature or vegetation, and then these are all integrated together. In this mapping approach, what happens is we take an address and then we geocode it into the geographic coordinates X and Y. And these coordinates are then placed onto the different layers and then the corresponding data read out. And this provides us with data such as exposure to nitrogen dioxide or the amount of green space in its vicinity. And these are some examples of the different kinds of layers you can use. So how do we generate the map for the layer for green space research? What we are actually generating to do this type of research is the Normalized Difference Vegetation Index, or NDVI. And what this does is it quantifies vegetation greenness. And this is an example seen here. It quantifies vegetation by measuring the difference between near infrared light, which vegetation strongly reflects, and red light, which vegetation absorbs. And this gives us an NDVI measure, which ranges from -1 to +1, with higher values indicating greater greenness and negative values near -1 corresponding to water. So in order to actually generate this image, what we do is we start with remote sensing or satellite image data, such as those that you can get from searching from such as an appropriate place from NASA's Early Observing System Data Information Systems website. In order to obtain a good image, what you need is maximum exposure contrast. So we look for cloud-free satellite images during the period of interest. So for example, since we're interested in green space, what we're looking for is to search for images during the summer months. Once you've identified an image to your satisfaction, an example being shown here, this is then fed into a program and processed to produce your NDVI map with the scales from -1 to +1. For our BIP NDVI map, we looked for cloud-free Landsat satellite images between May and August of 2006 to 2011, which were the relevant years for our study period. And based on that search, we have generated this NDVI map from the 10th of June. And you can see our scales here from -0.2 to 0.79. Now, in green space research, you can reclassify your null values, your negative values to null to get a scale from 0 to 1, which is what we've done for this here. So what can you do with these maps? Using the generated map, we can use it to visualize information, such as, for example, here, plotting the locations of our Pakistani origin and white British families. So I apologize for the quality of this map, but the Pakistani families are in red and the white British families are in black. And from here, you can just see that our Pakistani origin families are clustered closer to the center city, while our white British participants are further out. We can use our NDVI map to create variables to capture information about surrounding greenness around the residents, which can be considered a surrogate for general outdoor greenness of the study participants. So this variable is created by extracting average NDVI values in different size buffers around the address, so 100, 300, 500, and so on. The different size buffers are often used to explore the potentially different mechanisms that green space exposure is thought to work through. So for example, it's hypothesized that the immediate surrounding greenness could be more relevant for reducing pollution exposure or for mental health through psychological restoration because of visual access to greenness, while that larger size buffers may be associated to some other mechanisms such as increased physical activity. So in addition to these buffers of surrounding greenness, we can also create another variable looking at distance to a major green space. This proximity to a major green space is just defined as a straight line distance to a green space of 5,000 or more square meters. And this can be considered as a surrogate for access to green space. And because this is a straight line distance, it may not actually take into account the how far the green space is in real terms. So for example, if you had to cross a major road in order to reach that green space. So why are we interested in green space research and what have we done in BIP? We're interested because research on green space has shown that contact may improve both perceived as well as objective measures of physical and mental health. But that research is lacking on how these effects might differ by ethnic group or by socioeconomic status, which is something that we're able to explore in our research. I'm just going to give a very general gist of some of the research that has come out of the BIP cohort. And for more details, please have a look at the papers themselves. So in this first paper, the authors wanted to examine the relationship between green space and pregnancy and the resulting child's birth weight, and to assess whether this relationship is modified by ethnicity and or socioeconomic status. The available studies at the time on the potential modifying effect of ethnicity on the health benefits of green space were scarce but suggestive. And there is growing evidence that individual socioeconomic status can modify the health benefits of green space. So for example, there might be a larger benefit for pregnant women who might have a lower education level, but that neighborhood socioeconomic status hadn't been explored. So in this study, they want to explore both ethnicity and the two measures of socioeconomic status. So in this study, they looked at residential greenness as measured by the NDVI buffers, as well as proximity to green space with the outcome of child's birth weight. They also looked at, and then they looked at the effect modification by the potential modifiers ethnicity and socioeconomic status. And what they found was that there was a relationship between increasing residential greenness and increasing birth weight, but when looking by ethnicity, that this was only found in white British women. And the potential explanation, the authors thought, for why we're looking, we might see these ethnic differences may be the use of green space by these ethnic groups. It's been previously reported that minority ethnic populations are less likely to use the natural space compared to the white British groups. And this might be perhaps due to a lack of awareness or visibility or confidence or activities that appeal. In a second study, we looked at the relationship between green space, again measured by residential greenness, NDVI, and proximity and distance to green space on child's mental well-being at 4 to 5 years old. This study was done because while there are studies looking at green space and adult mental health, there are very few studies looking in children or exploring ethnicity. So the child's SDQ we used as our indicator of child's mental well-being. This is the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire. It's a brief tool that has 5 domains, and the sum of the 4 difficulty domains gives you a total behavior difficulty score. But you can also summarize the groups of 2 domains to come up with an internalizing or externalizing behavior scale. So again, we were interested in looking at the relationship between green space exposure measured by NDVI and distance on child's mental health and whether this was modified by ethnicity and socioeconomic status. And what the study found was that increasing residential greenness was associated with decreasing behavior difficulties, but that this was only found in South Asian children. Now, many studies have focused on just objective measures of green space, so distance to or the amount of green space around the residence, but very few have looked at more subjective measures. They haven't looked at perceived quality of the local green space or how it has been used by local communities. So in this study, we asked a subgroup to complete an additional questionnaire which asked questions about time spent outside, and we also asked about parent satisfaction with their local green space. And what we found in this subgroup is that it's parent satisfaction with green space that was significantly associated with fewer behavior difficulties and not quantity of green space. And this suggests that green space quality may be an important predictor of well-being, and that when we consider the role of green space on health, we really need to consider not just objective measures, but also more subjective measures of green space. So if you're interested in the BIP cohort and would like to take a look at what data that we have, please have a look at our website. This is the front page, and I'm just going to walk you through some of the pages that might be of interest. So on the top, you can see our research tab, which brings you to 2 other tabs that may be of interest. One is on documents and data. The other one is on how to access our data. If you go into how to documents and data, it brings you to additional information down here on our data dictionaries, our participant information, which includes things like consent forms, and also some of the questionnaires from our sub-studies. If we just look into the data dictionary tab, what you see is just an overview of some of the different dictionaries that we have online. The ones that you can't see below include things such as residential information and sources for GIS analysis, and data dictionaries on the healthcare record linkage. And If you go back to the research tab and then how to access data, this brings you to information that you can read through about our collaboration agreements and our expression of interest forms, which gives you additional information on how to get a hold of our data. There's a current stoppage on data requests in this current climate, but we hope that we can start processing external requests soon. And we really encourage researchers to have a look at our website and just email if you have any questions. Not all of our data dictionaries and sub-studies are online, but we're trying to make them up there as soon as possible. So just send us an email if you have any questions. And finally, I'd like to thank our amazing bid families and funders for making this work possible. And thank you very much for your attention today.